They slapped handcuffs on me, right in my own driveway. 6:30 a.m., just grabbing my lunchbox. 2 squad cars lit up the frost, lights flashing through diesel smoke from my truck. My coffee steamed on the porch as I stood there, boots crunching ice, wrists zip-tied. My neighbor Bethany, in her pink fuzzy robe, filmed everything, screaming,
"He's trespassing on HOA property! Arrest him!"
Cops looked baffled. Plot twist. I'm not even in her HOA. I bought this house to escape that suburban nightmare. No rules, no fines, no Karens. But Bethany claimed my driveway anyway. Huge mistake. I'm an electrician. I know how to turn rules against rule-obsessed people. By the end, her HOA empire will cost her thousands, her board seat, and her ego. She'll regret ever filming me. Waking up to cops on your own land? Insane. What's your worst HOA horror story? Drop it below. I read them all, and the wildest might get a shout-out next video. Stick around. Payback's coming in hot. I'm Jake, 45, divorced electrician who bought this Colorado farmhouse with one simple goal: escape HOA hell forever. My ex-wife's subdivision had rules for everything: doormat colors, grass height, even which direction you could park in your own driveway. After she took half my assets in the divorce, I used what was left to buy 2 acres of freedom. Old house, creaky hardwood floors, and 0 covenants. Perfect. The smell of sawdust and decades-old varnish hit me as I walked through my new place. Sure, the kitchen was Reagan-era beige and the fence looked like it survived a tornado, but it was mine. No monthly fees, no architectural committees, no Karens with clipboards. Then I met Bethany. Week 2, I'm trimming the hedge between my property and the subdivision next door, Willowbrook Estates, where every house looked like it came from the same Home Depot catalog. That's when she appeared. White Escalade. Blessed license plate frame. Enough makeup for a Vegas show at 9 a.m. Bethany Morrison, 52, self-appointed queen of suburban perfection, clicking across my driveway in designer heels like she owned the place. Welcome to the neighborhood. Pure artificial sweetener smile. I'm Bethany, HOA president. We need to discuss community standards. I set down my hedge trimmer, bark chips stuck to my work gloves. Thanks, but I'm not in your HOA. Her smile cracked. Well, yes, but your choices affect our property values. She whipped out a laminated folder. Who laminates complaints? Spreading papers like a prosecutor. This overgrown vegetation is unsightly. And that truck. She pointed at my 1987 Ford pickup that I was restoring. It's not appropriate for our area. The audacity punched me in the gut. This woman stood on my land, dictating my property management because it offended her subdivision sensibilities. Lady, you have 0 authority here. I bought this place to escape HOA garbage. The mask dropped. The mask. Her voice went full manager summoning mode. You should join our standards. I'll be watching your property for the community's sake. But here's where it got personal. As she strutted back to her Escalade, she stopped at my mailbox, and started taking photos of my address, my property, my truck. Then she made a phone call, loud enough for me to hear. Yes, I need to file a county complaint about unsafe vehicle storage and potential health violations. The taste of diesel exhaust mixed with her cloying perfume as she drove off, already plotting my misery from her climate-controlled fortress of beige. That night, I found tire tracks across my newly planted flower bed. Deep gouges where someone had deliberately driven through my marigolds, crushing 3 weeks of work into muddy pulp. The crunch of broken stems under my boots told the whole story. But the real kicker came 2 days later. A certified letter from Willowbrook Estates Community Standards Board, demanding I remedy multiple violations within 72 hours or face escalating enforcement actions. The letter listed everything from my non-conforming vehicle to my failure to maintain shared vegetation boundaries. The problem? Every single violation was on my property. Property she had no legal claim to. Property I'd specifically bought to escape people exactly like her. I called the number on the letterhead, got a disconnected line, checked the address, a UPS store mailbox. This woman had created fake authority to intimidate me into compliance. Wrong guy, Bethany. Dead wrong. See? 23 years as an electrician teaches you a few things about systems, electrical, legal, and people who think rules don't apply to them. And I was about to give Miss Community Standards a crash course in what happens when you mess with someone who knows how to flip all the switches. The smell of fresh coffee and mountain air filled my kitchen as I fired up my laptop. Time to do some research on Mrs. Bethany Morrison and her precious little kingdom. 3 days after the fake violation letter, Bethany launched her first real attack, the Great Driveway Dispute of 2024. I was loading equipment into my truck when she marched over with a measuring tape, clipboard, and the confidence of someone who'd never been told no in her entire privileged life. Behind her shuffled some poor guy in a wrinkled suit who looked like he'd rather be getting a root canal. "I've had the boundaries professionally assessed," she announced, unrolling what looked like a crayon drawing masquerading as a survey map. "Your gravel driveway extends 3 feet onto HOA buffer zone property." Me. The crunch of gravel under her designer boots echoed like gunshots as she planted little orange flags along her imaginary property line. Her consultant kept checking his phone like an Uber driver waiting for a better fare. "Lady, you can't just decide where property lines are," I said, watching this amateur hour surveying operation. She clutched her clipboard like a shield. "I have county records proving your encroachment." She waved selectively highlighted papers that looked suspiciously like printouts from a real estate website. That night, her white Escalade appeared parked strategically across my driveway entrance, not completely blocking it, just forcing me to squeeze past at an awkward angle every time I came home. The message was crystal clear: bow to Queen Bethany or suffer death by 1,000 petty inconveniences. She picked the wrong electrician to play chicken with. 23 years of dealing with building inspectors had taught me one golden rule: documentation beats bluster every single time. My divorce lawyer had hammered the same lesson into my skull during 18 months of legal warfare. So the next morning, I drove to the county clerk's office and dropped $200 for the complete property survey from 1987. The smell of old paper and industrial coffee filled the records room as I spread out the official documents. And there it was, beautiful, legally binding truth that would ruin Bethany's entire day. My property line didn't just extend to where my driveway ended, it extended 5 feet past it, well into what Princess Property Line thought was her sacred buffer zone. But the real jackpot was waiting in my basement. Boxes of paperwork from the previous owner included a thick folder labeled HOA Legal Battle 1987 to 1989. Apparently, Bethany's predecessor had tried this exact same boundary intimidation game 37 years ago. They lost spectacularly, $15,000 in legal fees and a permanent court order establishing the property lines. I felt like an archaeologist who just discovered buried treasure, except this treasure came with GPS coordinates and notarized signatures. Armed with documentation that could make a Supreme Court justice weep with joy, I called in the professionals: real surveyor, county planning office, and my insurance company's legal hotline. Within a week, I had official survey stakes marking my actual property line, 8 comfortable feet past my current driveway. Carlos, my mailman, practically threw a party when he saw the survey crew. "Dude, you're my hero," he said, watching them drive stakes with GPS precision. "That psycho tried to fine me $50 for parking on the wrong side of her street. I told her, lady, I work for the federal government. Your HOA can kiss my USPS uniform." Dutch at the hardware store loaded extra materials into my truck and grinned like Christmas morning. "Bethany Morrison? She's filed 47 complaints with the county this year alone. We've got a betting pool on how long until someone fights back hard enough to stick." The pattern was everywhere once you knew to look. Bethany had been terrorizing half the county with manufactured authority and weaponized complaints. But nobody had ever pushed back with enough legal firepower to make her retreat. That changed when she decided to escalate into actual criminal behavior. I came home from rewiring a restaurant to find my security camera knocked sideways and fresh tire tracks carving deep ruts across my front lawn. Not accidental damage, deliberate vandalism, bypassing my driveway entirely to tear donuts through my grass like some teenage joyride gone wrong. But here's what happens when you mess with someone who installs security systems for a living. Every angle gets covered. My backup cameras caught everything in glorious 1080p, including the blessed license plate clearly visible as the white Escalade demolished my landscaping at 2:17 a.m. The next morning brought Officer Rodriguez and his partner to my door, responding to reports of stalking and verbal threats against a neighbor. "Sir, we received complaints that you've been photographing her property and making threatening statements." I pulled out my phone and showed him the tire track footage. His expression shifted from professional courtesy to the look cops get when they realize someone's been wasting their time with bullshit. "Ma'am," he called toward Bethany's house, where curtains were twitching like nervous eyelids. "Filing false reports is a misdemeanor. Want to explain why your vehicle is on this man's security footage destroying his property?" The taste of victory mixed with crisp mountain air as her front door slammed shut. Round 1, Jake. Bethany's response to losing round 1 was like watching a toddler discover dynamite, sudden, destructive, and guaranteed to blow up in her face. Monday morning brought the paper blitzkrieg, 6 county violation notices crammed in my mailbox like confetti from hell, all filed within a 2-hour window by our favorite anonymous concerned citizen. Unlicensed electrical work. I laughed so hard I nearly choked on my coffee. 23 years licensed, certifications to wallpaper a bathroom, license number painted on my truck in 3-inch letters, amateur hour, junk vehicle storage creating neighborhood blight. My 1987 Ford pickup, a classic I was restoring with original parts and documented progress. Apparently, Project Cars made me the automotive equivalent of a meth lab. Unsafe structure posing imminent public danger. She'd convinced someone that my chicken coop, built to code with permits and inspections, threatened civilization itself. The chickens weren't even living there yet. The smell of fresh bureaucratic nonsense filled my kitchen as I spread out the notices. Each demanded immediate compliance or $500 fines per violation. But here's where Bethany's tech skills betrayed her. The county's digital system timestamps everything, including IP addresses. She'd literally spent 2 hours at her computer, manufacturing violations like running a harassment assembly line. Same computer, same morning, same desperate woman losing her mind. I called Maria Santos, the county inspector, directly. 20 years of construction work taught me that inspectors appreciate contractors who don't play games. "Jake, I saw your file this morning," Maria said when she arrived, zero patience for nonsense radiating from her clipboard. "Let me guess, HOA neighbor with authority delusions?" We walked through everything together. She verified my electrical permits, examined restoration documentation, spent 10 minutes praising my chicken coop craftsmanship. Her pen never moved except to sign approvals. "Want to see something interesting?" Maria pulled out her tablet, showing complaint statistics that made my electrician heart sing. Anonymous complaints require specific safety concerns and code citations. These just say violations exist without details. That's not how legitimate reporting works. The screen showed filing data by address. Bethany Morrison, 73% of all violations in our 60-square-mile district over 12 months. 73%. One address terrorizing an entire county. False reporting carries $500 per incident, Maria explained. Abusive complaint systems? That's a separate violation. Mrs. Morrison gets a very special letter this afternoon. But the real magic happened when neighbors started emerging like survivors of some suburban apocalypse. Word had spread that someone was finally fighting the Bethany Morrison reign of terror. Buck, the rancher to my north, appeared with beer and 40 years of grievances. That psycho tried fining me for my barn being aesthetically incompatible. "Lady, this barn predates your subdivision by 3 decades. Mrs. Juliet brought homemade cookies in fury. She called animal control on my rescue horses, claiming neglect because they weren't groomed to show standards. Officer laughed her off the property. Tom, the FedEx driver, stopped mid-route. She blocked my truck for 20 minutes because I parked wrong. Delivery vehicles lower property values if visible from her kitchen window. Pattern recognition kicked in. Bethany systematically targeted blue-collar workers, minorities, elderly folks, anyone who couldn't lawyer up against her manufactured authority. That evening, while grilling burgers for my impromptu support group, my phone buzzed. Unknown number, chilling message. "Your inspector stunt won't work. I have connections beyond your imagination. Drop this or face real consequences." I screenshot everything, forwarded to Officer Rodriguez. His response, under 5 minutes. "Electronic harassment equals felony. Save everything. Document everything." But the next morning brought a twist I never saw coming. I was drinking coffee, watching Maria's county truck parked outside Bethany's house, enjoying the distant sound of increasingly frantic explanations carrying across morning air. Papers were being served. Justice was happening. Then my phone rang. "Mr. Jake, this is Bethany Morrison." Sweet as artificial honey, panic barely contained. "I believe there's been a terrible misunderstanding about those violation notices. Perhaps we could discuss this like reasonable neighbors." I nearly dropped my mug. The woman who'd spent months terrorizing me was suddenly asking for negotiations? What kind of discussion, Bethany? "Well, I was thinking, maybe we got off on the wrong foot. I have a proposal that might benefit us both. Could you come over? I have coffee and information you might find interesting." The taste of victory mixed with curiosity as her voice cracked slightly on information. What kind of desperate move was Queen Suburbia planning now? But here's what 23 years of electrical work teaches you. When someone suddenly offers you exactly what they've been denying, check the wiring. Something's about to short circuit. "I'll be right over, Bethany." Round 2, Jake. But something told me round 3 was about to get very interesting. Walking into Bethany's house was like entering a museum dedicated to the worship of beige. Everything perfectly coordinated, aggressively neutral, and completely soulless. She led me through her temple of suburban conformity to the kitchen, where fresh coffee waited alongside what looked like a surrender treaty written on legal letterhead. But the smell of vanilla candles couldn't mask something else, the sharp, acrid scent of desperation. "Please, sit." Her usual drill sergeant tone had been replaced by something almost human. "I think we've both gotten carried away with this property situation." I stayed standing, 23 years of electrical house calls having taught me to always keep an exit strategy mapped out. Jake, I want to be completely transparent. She slid a thick envelope across her granite countertop. I may have been overzealous in my community oversight. This is $3,000 for any inconvenience. Real money, crisp hundreds still in bank bands. But her hands trembled as she poured coffee, and she kept glancing toward the window like expecting SWAT teams. What's the catch? No catch, just neighbors resolving differences. You might consider selling, though. I have real estate contacts who could get you significantly above market value. Win-win situation. The pieces clicked like circuit breakers falling into place. The panicked phone call, sudden cash offers, carefully worded, above market value. This wasn't negotiation. This was extortion gift-wrapped in suburban pleasantries. And if I refuse your generous offer? Her mask cracked just enough to reveal something ugly underneath. County investigations can become very complex, expensive, time-consuming. Hate to see your electrical business suffer during prolonged bureaucratic processes. Jackpot. Textbook racketeering delivered with a smile. But what Princess Property Values didn't realize was my phone had been recording since her doorbell chimed, courtesy of an app my divorce lawyer had recommended for difficult negotiations. Fascinating offer, I said, projecting toward my shirt pocket. So you're saying if I don't sell my property, you'll weaponize fake county complaints to destroy my livelihood? I never said fake, but you explicitly threatened to make my business suffer through bureaucratic harassment unless I comply with your demands? Her coffee cup rattled like chattering teeth. You're misinterpreting my words. I pulled out my phone, stopped recording, hit playback. Her voice, crystal clear. County investigations can become very complex. Hate to see your business suffer. She went pale as fresh printer paper. You recorded our private conversation. Colorado's one-party consent state, completely legal. Thank you again, divorce lawyer education. But here's where Bethany's desperation revealed the real story. While she hyperventilated about recordings, I spotted what she'd tried to hide. A stack of mail featuring more red final notice stamps than a deadbeat's kitchen table. IRS Colorado State Attorney General. Willowbrook Estates, HOA, legal action pending. And one that made my electrician brain light up like a Christmas tree. U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs, Fraud Investigation Division. Bethany caught me reading and frantically swept everything into a drawer, but too late. The puzzle pieces were assembling themselves into a very ugly picture. Bethany, when did you last attend an actual HOA board meeting? That's absolutely none of your... Because Linda Juliet, your treasurer, told me something interesting yesterday. The board voted you out 8 months ago, but you kept collecting dues and issuing fines anyway. Her designer kitchen suddenly felt like a cage as she pressed against the sink. You don't understand community dynamics. I understand that collecting money under false pretenses is fraud, filing fabricated government reports is a felony, and threatening livelihoods for compliance money, that's organized crime with a homeowners association theme. The vanilla candle scent mixed with genuine fear sweat as reality demolished her suburban delusions. But the real bombshell was yet to come. Also interesting, I continued, that VA envelope. Funny thing about veterans benefits fraud, federal investigators take that personally, especially when someone's been collecting disability payments for PTSD from military service. That never happened. Her legs went out. She actually slid down the cabinet doors to sit on her pristine kitchen floor. How did you... Public records, Bethany. Your house purchase shows a VA loan, but military service records are surprisingly easy to verify when you know the right people. Turns out, falsifying military service for financial benefits carries a 20-year federal sentence. She started crying, actual tears mixing with mascara, creating dark streams down her foundation-caked cheeks. You don't understand the financial pressure, the debts, everything's falling apart. For maybe half a second, I felt sorry for her. Then I remembered handcuffs in my own driveway and malicious tire tracks through my flower bed. Here's what's going to happen, I said, looking down at this pathetic creature who'd terrorized half a county. You're going to stop. All of it. The fake complaints, the harassment, the unauthorized fee collection, everything. And if I do, then maybe this recording stays private. Maybe I don't call the VA fraud hotline. Maybe. The mountain air tasted like justice as I left her crumpled on her kitchen floor, finally understanding that her reign of suburban terror was officially over. Round 3, Jake. But something told me Bethany's desperation was about to get dangerous. 2 days after watching Bethany crumble on her kitchen floor, I was drowning in dusty property records at the county courthouse when I struck pure legal gold. I'd gone there hunting easement laws, electrician's attention to boring details that most people ignore. What I found instead was financial TNT with a 20-year federal fuse attached. The smell of decades-old paper and industrial courthouse coffee filled my nostrils as I spread documents across the scratched metal table. That's when I spotted something that made every hour of divorce paperwork suddenly worth it. Bethany Morrison owed $47,000 in unpaid HOA assessments to her own community. Not a mistake. Not a processing error. $47,000 in legitimate fees, fines, and special assessments that the Queen of Community Standards had somehow avoided paying while fining her neighbors for grass height violations. But the real kicker was buried in Willowbrook Estates board minutes, public records that anyone could access if they had the patience to sit in uncomfortable chairs for 3 hours. Bethany had been voted out as HOA president 8 months ago. Unanimous decision. The resolution cited financial irregularities and systematic abuse of authority. She'd simply ignored the vote and kept operating like some kind of suburban dictator whose term had expired but refused to leave office. Linda Juliet, the real treasurer, confirmed my suspicions when I called from the courthouse parking lot. "We've been trying to remove her from bank accounts for months," Linda's voice cracked with frustration. "But she set up original banking as sole signatory, legal limbo while lawyers untangle signature cards from 2019. So she's been stealing? Nearly $30,000 in unauthorized collections over 12 months. Dues, fines, special assessments, all deposited into accounts only she controls." The courthouse steps felt cold under my boots as the magnitude hit me. Bethany wasn't just a control freak neighbor from hell, she was running a criminal enterprise disguised as community management, using fake authority to extort money from people who trusted the system to protect them. But my buddy Rick from the Veterans Group had delivered the nuclear option. Rick's contacts in federal investigations had pulled Bethany's complete VA file, and what they found was criminal stupidity so pure it belonged in a textbook. Bethany Morrison, 0 military service, not 1 day in uniform. But her VA loan application claimed 3 years active duty with combat deployments to Afghanistan, complete with fabricated service numbers and forged DD-214 discharge papers. The house she'd used as headquarters for her suburban terrorism campaign, built entirely on federal fraud worth 2 decades in prison. Here's the beautiful, poetic justice of it all. This woman had spent months trying to destroy my life over imaginary property violations while living in a house she'd stolen from actual veterans through documented federal crimes. Every threatening phone call, every fake complaint, every attempt to bully me into submission had come from someone who'd built her entire lifestyle on lies that carried mandatory minimum sentences. I sat on those courthouse steps, autumn wind carrying the scent of dying leaves and approaching winter, holding enough evidence to obliterate Bethany's life with a single phone call to federal investigators. But destruction without education teaches nothing. Revenge without public accountability just creates smarter criminals. What Bethany Morrison needed wasn't just imprisonment, she needed a masterclass in consequences delivered in front of everyone she'd terrorized. Something so public, so humiliating, so perfectly calibrated that every future suburban tyrant would think twice before weaponizing fake authority against their neighbors. The taste of crisp mountain air mixed with anticipation as I loaded my briefcase with documents that would change everything. Time to plan the downfall of a queen. And I knew exactly how to make it spectacular. The plan hit me like lightning while I was installing a new electrical panel for Mrs. Patterson, listening to her vent about Bethany's latest power trip. "That psycho called animal control on my chickens for making noise at 6 a.m., Mrs. Patterson fumed, holding my flashlight steady. Apparently roosters crowing violates her imaginary noise ordinance. The smell of hot electrical connections and fresh coffee filled her kitchen as the solution crystallized in my mind. If Princess Property Line wanted to play boundary games, I'd give her a master class in exactly where those boundaries were, with visual aids she'd never forget. The next morning found me at Dutch's hardware store, loading enough PVC pipe and sprinkler components to irrigate half of Colorado. Dutch's grin could have powered Vegas when I explained my pest control project. "Motion-activated irrigation system for trespassers?" he chuckled, scanning barcode after barcode. "That's pure genius, brother. How's it work?" "PIR motion sensors at the exact legal boundary, wired to industrial sprinkler valves connected to my well pressure. Anyone crosses my survey line, they get a free shower courtesy of physics and property law." The technical setup was electrician simple but devastatingly effective. $200 in materials, 4 hours of installation, decades of satisfaction watching entitled people learn about property rights the refreshing way. Best part? Completely legal in Colorado. Motion-activated sprinklers count as property protection, not assault, when triggered by actual trespassing. But hardware was just foreplay. The real seduction required building a coalition that would make political operatives jealous. Linda Juliet from the legitimate HOA board became my first recruit, bringing 8 months of documentation proving Bethany's financial crimes. We met in my garage, the smell of motor oil and justice mixing in the mountain air. "She's terrorized this entire area with fake authority," Linda said, spreading bank statements across my workbench. $30,000 stolen minimum, but everyone's too scared of retaliation to fight back. Not anymore, they're not. Buck, the old rancher, provided surveillance equipment that could spot a gnat scratching its ass from 3 counties away. 40 years of land disputes had taught him that documentation beats everything, and his collection of telephoto lenses looked like something from a spy movie. "Been watching that woman's harassment campaign for months," he drawled, calibrating a camera that cost more than my truck. "Time someone taught her about consequences." Carlos, my federal mailman, brought the kind of jurisdiction that makes criminals nervous. Mail theft, delivery interference, harassment of postal employees. She's violated enough federal statutes to keep prosecutors busy until retirement. Even Maria, the county inspector, offered unofficial coordination by scheduling a routine neighborhood compliance review for the exact weekend of my educational demonstration. "Funny how thorough inspections tend to uncover interesting violations when timing's right," she mentioned with professional neutrality that fooled absolutely nobody. The documentation system I assembled would make CSY technicians weep with envy. Marcus, my videographer friend who owed me for rewiring his studio, agreed to film everything with equipment that could capture pores from orbit. Multiple wireless cameras with cellular backup, real-time cloud streaming, directional microphones that hear whispers across football fields, Marcus explained, testing angles. "You're not playing around with this, are you?" "Dead serious. This woman needs public education about reality, delivered with maximum visual impact." But the stroke of pure evil genius came through Linda's intelligence network. Bethany's subdivision was hosting their annual neighborhood barbecue the same weekend. Perfect timing for maximum audience participation in community education. Invitations flowed through underground channels like Samizdat Literature. County officials, local media, legitimate board members, and every neighbor who'd suffered under Bethany's manufactured authority reign. The cover story was brilliant in its simplicity. Property line education with professional surveying, followed by community barbecue discussing neighborhood cooperation. Dutch donated grilling supplies with conspiratorial enthusiasm. Wouldn't miss this educational opportunity for anything. Mrs. Patterson offered potato salad and 40 years of righteous anger. That woman tried finding me for chickens making chicken noises. Time someone find her for making human nonsense. Tom, the FedEx driver, coordinated his route for maximum documentation value. Been waiting months to watch karma catch up with that suburban terrorist. The garage filled with sawdust scent and anticipation as final preparations came together. Survey equipment calibrated to satellite precision. Sprinkler system tested and primed for action. Evidence files organized for devastating presentation impact. But the crown jewel remained Rick's Veterans Group surprise. Federal investigators conducting routine verification procedures would just happen to be in the neighborhood, ready to present their findings about VA fraud to any interested community members. The taste of crisp mountain air mixed with approaching justice as I reviewed the timeline one final time. Everything synchronized for maximum educational impact, minimum legal exposure, and complete obliteration of Bethany's delusions of authority. Saturday morning, 10 a.m. Property line education begins. Bethany Morrison was about to receive the most expensive lesson of her privileged life, delivered with industrial-strength consequences and professional documentation. Class was almost in session. The night before my property line education event, Bethany went full psycho at 2:17 a.m., and my security cameras caught every glorious second. I woke to metal scraping concrete outside my window. The taste of adrenaline mixed with mountain air as I grabbed my phone and pulled up the security feed. There she was. Princess Property Values dressed head to toe in black like some suburban ninja attacking my survey stakes with a crowbar. The infrared cameras captured everything in stunning detail. Bethany grunting and cursing as she tried to destroy perfectly legal boundary markers, muttering threats that would make truckers blush. But here's what happens when you sabotage an electrician's property. Every system has backup systems. She managed to yank exactly one stake before my motion-activated sprinkler system engaged with prejudice. The blast of ice-cold well water hit her like a freight train, spinning her around and launching the crowbar into orbit. She shrieked loud enough to register on seismic equipment, slipped in the instant mud bath she'd created, and face-planted in my flower bed with the grace of a falling refrigerator. But the comedy masterpiece happened when she tried escaping back to her house. Each panicked step triggered additional sprinkler zones, creating a gauntlet of high-pressure hydration that soaked her from every angle. By the time she reached her front door, she looked like a drowned poodle wearing expensive athletic wear. The footage was so perfect I considered submitting it to America's Funniest Home Videos. But Bethany's midnight gardening expedition was just the opening act. The main performance arrived with Saturday's sunrise in the form of a bribery attempt so blatant it belonged in law school textbooks. I was loading coolers with ice when she materialized at my door, looking like she'd spent the night wrestling demons and losing badly. Her usual magazine-perfect appearance had been replaced by dark circles, smeared mascara, and the kind of desperate energy that radiates from people whose lives are actively imploding. "Jake, we need to discuss today before people arrive." Her voice cracked like old wood under pressure. She produced an envelope thick enough to stop bullets. Cash, serious cash, still wearing bank wrappers. $20,000, she said, hands trembling like earthquake aftershocks. "More than enough to resolve our misunderstandings. You could take a vacation, maybe reconsider this afternoon's activities." The morning air carried her desperation like expensive perfume applied with a paint roller. "And if I refuse your generous donation?" Her facade shattered completely. "Then I make phone calls. Your electrical license gets reviewed for mysterious code violations. Business insurance faces sudden scrutiny. County health inspectors develop intense interest in your septic system." I pulled out my phone, started recording, made sure she could see the screen. "Repeat that threat, please, for clarity." She realized she'd just handed me a federal case wrapped in a bow. "I didn't mean..." That came out wrong. "You offered 20 grand to cancel a neighborhood barbecue, then threatened professional retaliation if I refused. That's extortion with federal jurisdiction sprinkles on top." But here's where Bethany's panic revealed something I hadn't expected. Her white Escalade sat in my driveway, engine running, packed with moving boxes like someone planning immediate evacuation. "Planning a trip, Bethany?" She glanced toward her escape vehicle, realizing I'd spotted the evidence. "Just reorganizing some storage items." "Reorganizing before federal investigators complete their VA fraud review? Fascinating timing coincidence." That's when her psychological dam burst spectacularly. "You don't understand," she screamed loud enough to crack windows 3 counties over. "Everything's collapsing. The board, the accounts, the mortgage payments. I need that money to survive." Neighbors emerged from houses like prairie dogs, sensing drama. Mrs. Patterson appeared with coffee and the expression of someone preparing for premium entertainment. "I built this community," Bethany continued her public meltdown. "I maintained standards. I protected property values. And this is my reward? Harassment from some divorced electrician who doesn't appreciate civilized society?" Buck strolled over with camera equipment, looking like National Geographic photographer heading to document rare wildlife. "Morning, Jake. Sounds like someone's having difficulties." Carlos pulled up in his mail truck, off-duty but unable to resist front-row seats to suburban collapse. This the lady who tried fining federal employees for doing federal jobs? But the twist that made everything perfect came when Linda Juliet arrived early for barbecue setup and overheard Bethany's financial confession. "Wait," Linda called out, pulling out her phone. "Did she just admit to stealing HOA funds because she needs money to survive? Because I've been looking for that confession for 8 months." Bethany realized she'd just confessed to embezzlement in front of witnesses, cameras, and the actual HOA treasurer who'd been building a criminal case against her. The smell of coffee and approaching justice filled the morning air as reality demolished her final delusions. "You want this resolved quietly?" I asked. "Pack your boxes, leave the county, never contact anyone here again." She looked around at the growing crowd documenting her collapse, at 20 years of suburban terrorism ending in spectacular public humiliation. "This isn't over," she whispered. "Lady, it's been over since you called cops on me for existing. You just forgot to stop digging." After her public meltdown and bribery confession, Bethany disappeared for exactly 43 minutes. When she returned, she'd transformed from desperate suburban housewife into something far more dangerous. A cornered animal with nothing left to lose. The first sign of her final gambit came when a black sedan with tinted windows pulled into her driveway. 2 men in expensive suits emerged carrying briefcases and the kind of authority that comes with federal badges. But something felt wrong about the whole scene. Their timing was too convenient, their presence too theatrical. I was arranging tables for the barbecue when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Federal investigation delayed due to new evidence. Stand down immediately or face obstruction charges." The message had official-sounding language but felt like amateur-hour theater. Real federal agents don't communicate through anonymous texts, and they certainly don't tell witnesses to stand down from neighborhood barbecues. Buck wandered over, telephoto lens trained on the mystery visitors. "Those boys aren't federal anything," he drawled. "Real investigators don't show up in rental cars with Enterprise stickers still on the bumpers." Marcus, setting up camera equipment, zoomed in on the license plates. "Bethany's getting desperate if she's hiring actors to play federal agents. That's impersonating federal officers. Major felony territory." Yes, but the fake feds were just the opening move. Bethany's real strategy became clear when neighbors started receiving phone calls claiming the barbecue had been canceled due to federal investigation. The voice on the calls, suspiciously similar to Bethany's, disguised with what sounded like a fake Southern accent. Mrs. Patterson called me, confused and angry. Some woman claiming to be from the county called saying today's gathering was canceled due to ongoing criminal proceedings. Sounded like that Morrison psycho trying to talk like Scarlett O'Hara. The smell of charcoal and mounting frustration filled the air as I realized Bethany was attempting to sabotage the event by confusing and intimidating the very people she'd spent months terrorizing. But she'd underestimated the depth of community anger she'd generated. Instead of staying home, neighbors started arriving early, bringing extra food and stories about the suspicious phone calls. Dutch showed up with his entire family and enough hamburger meat to feed a small army. That woman called my wife, tried to cancel our attendance with some garbage about federal warrants. We've been waiting months to watch karma catch up with suburban Hitler. Carlos arrived in his personal vehicle, bringing his wife and teenage kids who wanted to witness the crazy HOA lady finally getting what she deserves. Even Tom from FedEx showed up on his day off, carrying a cooler and grinning like Christmas morning. But Bethany wasn't finished with her amateur dramatics. Around noon, just as the crowd was hitting peak attendance, she emerged from her house wearing what appeared to be a business suit and carrying official-looking documents. The fake federal agents flanked her as she marched toward my property line with the confidence of someone who'd completely lost touch with reality. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced in a voice loud enough to reach the back rows, "I regret to inform you that this gathering is in violation of multiple federal statutes. As the duly appointed community standards representative, I'm ordering immediate dispersal to avoid criminal liability." The silence that followed was so complete you could hear pine needles falling. Then Buck started laughing. Deep, rumbling ranch owner laughter that built into something infectious. Soon, half the crowd was giggling, pointing at Bethany's theatrical federal agent costume party. "Ma'am," Linda Juliet called out, holding up her phone. "I'm recording this for our embezzlement case file. Please continue explaining your federal authority to prosecute neighborhood barbecues." That's when one of Bethany's fake agents made a critical error. He tried to confiscate Maria's county inspector credentials, claiming they interfered with federal jurisdiction. Maria, who'd been quietly documenting code violations on Bethany's property, looked at the guy like he'd just claimed to be Superman. "Sir, you just attempted to interfere with a county official performing lawful duties. That's a felony." She pulled out her radio and called for real backup. "Dispatch, I need Sheriff's Department at address for impersonation of federal officers and interference with county business." The fake agents realized they'd wandered into felony territory and headed for their rental car faster than roaches when lights come on. But Bethany, completely unhinged at this point, chased after them screaming about breach of contract and demanding her money back. The crowd watched in fascination as Queen Suburbia's final, desperate gambit collapsed in spectacular fashion. She'd hired actors to play federal agents, attempted to cancel the event through fraudulent phone calls, and then publicly confessed to paying people to impersonate federal officers. The sound of approaching sirens mixed with the smell of grilling burgers as real law enforcement arrived to sort out Bethany's latest crime spree. But the best part was yet to come, because while Bethany had been busy staging amateur theater, actual federal investigators had been watching everything from unmarked vehicles, documenting her attempts to obstruct their legitimate investigation. The education was about to begin in earnest. The real federal agents revealed themselves just as Bethany finished chasing her fake ones across the yard, screaming about refunds. Special Agent Torres and Agent Kim emerged from a gray sedan that had been parked inconspicuously down the road for the past hour, badges displayed and expressions suggesting they'd enjoyed every moment of Bethany's amateur dramatics. "Ma'am, we need to discuss your recent activities," Agent Torres announced, his voice carrying the kind of authority that makes criminals wet themselves. The crowd of 50-plus neighbors went silent, except for the gentle sizzle of hamburgers on grills and the distant sound of Bethany's world ending in real time. But before the federal education could begin, Bethany decided to make one final, spectacular mistake. She spotted my motion sensor sprinkler system and apparently decided that destroying the evidence of her midnight sabotage attempt would somehow save her from federal charges. In front of 50 witnesses, 2 federal agents, 3 county officials, and enough cameras to film a documentary, she grabbed a shovel and charged toward my property line. "This is all your fault," she shrieked, raising the shovel like some kind of suburban battle axe. "I'm ending this property line nonsense right now." The first step onto my property triggered the closest sprinkler zone. The second step activated 2 more. By the third step, Princess Property Values was caught in a crossfire of high-pressure irrigation that spun her around like a washing machine on steroids. The shovel went flying, her business suit became transparent, and her carefully applied makeup ran down her face in colorful streams that would make Picasso jealous. But here's the beautiful part. She kept advancing, triggering sensor after sensor, creating a water show that Disney would envy. The crowd watched in stunned amazement as Bethany Morrison, would-be suburban dictator, got systematically soaked by the very property line she'd spent months trying to steal. She slipped in the mud, fell face first into my flower bed for the second time in 12 hours, and came up looking like she'd been dunked in a swamp. But the irrigation system wasn't finished with her education. Every time she tried to stand, another sensor activated. Every attempt to retreat triggered a new zone. She was trapped in an automated demonstration of property rights that was both hilarious and deeply satisfying to watch. "Turn it off!" she screamed, covered in mud and streaming water. "This is assault!" That's when I delivered the mic drop moment I'd been saving for months. "Ma'am, you're trespassing on clearly marked private property, destroying landscaping and threatening people with a weapon. The sprinkler system is just watering my lawn, not my fault you're standing in it." The crowd erupted in applause mixed with laughter as Bethany realized she'd been defeated by basic irrigation technology and property law. Agent Torres stepped forward, somehow managing to maintain professional composure while watching a federal fraud suspect get educated by sprinklers. "Mrs. Morrison, you're under arrest for wire fraud, mail fraud, impersonation of federal officers, and violation of the Veterans Benefits Act. You have the right to remain silent." But Bethany wasn't done making mistakes. As Agent Kim approached with handcuffs, she tried to run, forgetting that she was still standing in the middle of my motion sensor grid. The sprint toward her house triggered every remaining sprinkler zone in sequence, creating a gauntlet of water that would challenge Olympic athletes. She made it exactly 15 feet before slipping again, this time sliding across my driveway like she was stealing second base. The handcuffs went on while she lay in a puddle of her own making, soaking wet, covered in mud, and surrounded by 50 neighbors who'd suffered under her manufactured authority for years. Dutch started a slow clap that built into thunderous applause. Mrs. Patterson whooped like she was at a rodeo. Carlos filmed everything on his phone, probably planning to share it with postal workers nationwide. But the absolute perfect ending came when Linda Juliet stepped forward with a folder full of financial documents. "Agents, I have complete records of the embezzlement scheme, including bank statements showing where the stolen HOA funds went. Turns out most of it funded her fraudulent lifestyle and legal fees for the VA loan fraud." Agent Torres accepted the evidence with professional gratitude. "Ma'am, this documentation will be extremely helpful for the prosecution." As they loaded a still-dripping Bethany into the federal vehicle, she looked back at the crowd with pure hatred. "This isn't justice," she screamed through the car window. "I was protecting property values. I was maintaining standards," Buck called back from the crowd. "Standards like fraud, embezzlement, and impersonating federal officers? Those standards?" The taste of victory mixed with mountain air and the smell of perfectly grilled hamburgers as the federal car disappeared down the road, taking suburban tyranny with it. Maria, the county inspector, raised her beer in a toast. To property rights, actual justice, and motion-activated sprinkler systems. The cheer that went up could probably be heard in Denver. 6 months later, Bethany Morrison was enjoying federal accommodations in a minimum security facility, contemplating 18 months of community service at actual veterans facilities. The judge's idea of poetic justice for someone who'd stolen benefits meant for real heroes. The morning newspaper lay on my kitchen table, folded open to a small article. Local woman sentenced in federal fraud case. 18 months prison, full restitution of $73,000 to defrauded neighbors, permanent prohibition from serving on any HOA board, and a lifetime ban from VA benefits. Her house had sold at auction to cover legal fees and victim compensation. Justice, served at exactly the right temperature. But the real victory wasn't Bethany's downfall. It was what rose from the ashes of her suburban terrorism campaign. The neighborhood barbecue had become a monthly tradition, rotating between properties as people who'd lived in fear for years finally discovered they actually liked each other. Dutch brought his famous ribs, Mrs. Patterson contributed chicken stories that got funnier with each telling, and Carlos shared postal service wisdom that kept everyone entertained. Buck had started an informal neighborhood watch program, using his surveillance expertise to help folks secure their properties against actual threats, not imaginary property line violations. The man could spot trouble from 3 counties away and had become the unofficial sheriff of common sense enforcement. Linda Juliet and the reformed HOA board had implemented new policies preventing future Bethany situations. No single-person control of finances, public meetings with actual transparency, and a formal complaint process that required evidence rather than paranoid delusions. Property values had actually increased once people realized they could live without constant harassment. My electrical business had exploded after the story went viral on social media. Turns out, half of rural Colorado had HOA horror stories and wanted to hire the guy who'd defeated suburban tyranny with sprinkler systems. The motion-activated irrigation setup had become my signature service. Boundary protection systems was now 30% of my revenue. But the best part was Maria, the county inspector who'd started joining me for coffee most mornings. Turns out, someone who appreciates proper electrical work and has zero tolerance for bureaucratic nonsense makes excellent company. We'd been talking about building an addition to my house, properly permitted, professionally inspected, and absolutely not requiring anyone's approval except the county's. The community healing had spread beyond property lines. Mrs. Juliet's rescue horses now had visitors every weekend, kids from town learning about animal care while their parents swapped stories about overcoming neighborhood bullies. Buck had donated part of his ranch for a community garden where people could grow actual food instead of cultivating grievances. Even Tom, the FedEx driver, had become part of the extended family, stopping by for coffee whenever his route allowed. "You know what's funny?" he'd said last week. "My delivery times are 20% faster now that I don't have to deal with crazy women blocking trucks and demanding to inspect packages." The ripple effects had reached state government. Bethany's law, officially called the Community Association Accountability Act, now required HOA boards to carry insurance, maintain transparent finances, and face criminal penalties for abuse of authority. 3 other counties had used my documentation methods to remove problem board members, and the Colorado Attorney General's office had started an HOA fraud hotline. My property had become an unofficial training center for people dealing with neighborhood harassment. The sprinkler system was now part of guided tours showing how technology could enforce legal boundaries without violence or confrontation. I'd helped 12 families install similar systems, and property line disputes in our area had dropped to 0. Last month, I'd established the Good Neighbor Scholarship Fund using money recovered from Bethany's restitution payments. Local trade school students could apply for grants covering electrical, plumbing, or construction training, real skills that build communities instead of tearing them down. The scholarship's first recipient was Carlos's oldest son, Miguel, who wanted to become an electrician. Because Mr. Jake showed me how knowing the rules can protect people from bullies, he'd written in his application essay. This morning, sipping coffee on my porch, watching the sunrise paint mountains in colors that never get old, I realized something profound. Sometimes the best way to deal with petty tyrants isn't to become one yourself. It's to build something better and invite everyone else to join you. The taste of mountain air carried the scent of fresh possibilities and the sound of neighbors actually talking to each other instead of filing complaints.
You know, just how our deal with the sprinkler system and the 18-month sentence really come down to one thing. Bethany thought she could just make up authority when none exists, and for a while, it worked. The thing about people like her is they count on you not knowing the rules better than they do. They count on you getting emotional, making mistakes when you're angry. Jess could easily load his car when she called the cops on him that first morning. Most people would have, but he did not. He just quietly started documenting everything. Got the real survey done, learned what the actual law were, not what she claimed they were. I've been covering the HOA story for a while, and there's always that moment then the person being harassed realizes they don't have to take it anymore. Sometimes it's fighting an old covenant that would never properly failed. Sometimes it's find out the board had been ignoring its own rules for years. For Jack, it was the sprinkler system, simple motion sensor and some PVC pipe. Nothing fancy, but it made the property line real in a way that couldn't be avoided or ignored. Have you ever dealt with someone on your HOA board who thought the rules applied differently to them? I'd be curious to hear about it in the comments. These situations, they are more common than you might think. If you found Jack's story useful, hit that like button and subscribe if you want to see more of these. There are plenty of other HOA battles out there, and some of them get even more interesting than motion-activated sprinklers.